Hey Mustangs, in this video we're going to take a look at blood vessels. Now usually when people hear blood vessels they think of veins. And the reason why people think of veins, usually when you go to the doctors, they're going to draw blood, they're looking for a vein. But there's actually two other major types of blood vessels as well. Okay? And each one is going to have its own special job that it does in making sure blood keeps on flowing correctly through the body. So when we look at our blood vessels, here in this picture we're looking at two major blood vessels, veins and arteries, and there's still a third major blood vessel we'll be looking at. But you can see, again, these are tubes running throughout your entire body, carrying oxygen and nutrients to cells and carrying waste away from cells. Alright, so let's go ahead and take a look at the first type of blood vessel, okay, which is going to be arteries. Alright, so this is going to go on page 171. So at the top of 171, title it 3 Types of Blood Vessels. And I'd like you to divide that page into 3 sections. So 1, 2, 3 equal sections on that page. And each section will be dedicated to one of the different types of blood vessels. So let's go ahead and start with arteries. So we're going to draw a picture to the left-hand side here. And then over here we're going to write information. Okay? So this is going to represent an artery. So blood vessels are simply tubes. So when you take a look at this, we're looking at a tube. So this is a tube. That would be the main opening. This right here, this is the wall of the artery. And then here's the outside of the artery. And it would extend because it is a tube going through. Okay? So the thing with arteries, one thing to help us remember, there's little tricks here that we could use for each of these. A equals away. Right over here, this is an artery. Okay, so A equals away. And what we mean by that is that arteries carry blood away from the heart. Okay, so any blood vessels, any tubes going away from the heart are arteries. So A, away, carry blood away from the heart. Second thing, these are large, thick blood vessels with high pressure and thick walls. Okay. Since arteries are the very first blood vessel to have the blood pumped into them, there's a lot of pressure that's put on their walls. So as soon as the ventricles of the heart squeeze and the blood pumps out, the blood's going to hit the walls of the artery and cause a lot of pressure within arteries. That's why the walls of arteries are very thick, so that way these arteries can hold up to that pressure. You wouldn't want an artery to burst open. Now, if you've ever seen those horror movies where someone gets like cut in the neck and blood is like squirting out in like pulses, surprisingly, that's actually pretty accurate. If an artery gets cut open, there's so much pressure on them that blood will squirt out. So I'm usually telling you that popular media is always getting things wrong, but that's pretty accurate. And again, it depends on what type of movie you're looking at. Some of them are gross over-exaggerations where it's squirting like 30 feet in the air, crazy stuff like that. But overall, if an artery gets cut because of the pressure that they're under, blood is going to squirt out. Okay? And finally, the last thing with arteries is the type of blood that they're carrying. Okay, so when we talk about type of blood, what I mean by that is it oxygen rich, where it's carrying lots of oxygen and very little carbon dioxide, or is it oxygen poor, where it's carrying very little oxygen and lots of carbon dioxide? Well, if we're talking about an artery and it's carrying blood out to the body, we're going to say that it's carrying oxygen rich blood. Okay, so oxygen-rich blood out to the body. So all arteries carry oxygen-rich blood with one exception, and that's the pulmonary artery, which carries the oxygen-poor blood to the lungs so they could pick up oxygen. Other than that, all arteries carry oxygen-rich blood. All right. the second type, so this would be your line that you already created on your page. The second type of blood vessel we're going to look at is going to be capillaries. Oops. Okay. Now capillaries are really, really tiny, and I'm not going to draw it to scale here. Of course, none of these are to scale, but I'm not going to draw it to scale in comparison to the artery and the vein, so I'm going to actually blow capillaries up here and make them bigger than they would actually be. So with the arteries, the capillaries, we're going to have like this. All right, so let's go ahead and write down the information for this one. So for the capillaries, it's their job to carry blood through organs. And these are the smallest, thinnest blood vessels. Okay, and the reason that they have to be the smallest, thinnest blood vessels is because this is where oxygen and carbon dioxide exchange is going to take place. Okay, so capillaries are super, super tiny, and they run alongside all of your cells. Okay, so capillaries are always in close proximity to cells, so that way the blood can transfer oxygen into the cells, and the cells can take the carbon dioxide away. Give up their carbon dioxide back into the blood. So we're going to draw that in just a moment. And then finally, the last thing, this is why I drew red here and blue here. They carry both. So oxygen-rich blood and oxygen-poor blood is what capillaries carry. So let's go ahead and go back to the reason why they're the smallest, thinnest blood vessels. Okay, they're so small that red blood cells have to line up single file in order to travel through them. That's how small capillaries are. And they're running alongside cells, so these little boxes that I'm creating here are going to represent cells. Okay, so you have cells on the sides of capillaries. And their walls have to be thin enough that oxygen can diffuse, and this is a word we learned a long time ago, can diffuse from the blood here into the cells, and carbon dioxide can diffuse out of the cells into the blood. Okay, so I'm going to draw an arrow here. This is oxygen and nutrients are going into cells. And then I'm going to draw this off to the side, but the same thing would be happening for each and every one of these cells. Over here, that's going to be CO2 and waste diffusing out. Okay, so CO2 and waste diffuse out of the cells. Okay, and this is why capillaries are so important. Even though they're the smallest and thinnest, they have the most important job, because this is where all the exchange goes down. Oxygen and nutrients into cells, carbon dioxide and waste out of cells. All right, the final blood vessel here is going to be veins. So the one that people are most familiar with. Okay, so here is my vein represented here. Okay, as a tube. And these guys don't have very thick walls, so I'm going to draw much thinner walls than the artery had. Okay, so let's go ahead and write down the info for this one. So veins carry oxygen, poor blood back to the heart. Okay, so oxygen poor blood back to the heart. These are large vessels with low pressure. And many have valves. So I'm going to go ahead and draw a valve in here. That would represent a valve. So a valve opens and closes, so this flap of tissue can open and close. Okay. So let's go ahead and discuss this. Veins are going to carry oxygen-poor blood back to the heart because the oxygen was already given to the cells, and a lot of carbon dioxide is now in the blood. There's still oxygen in there. Oxygen-poor, all that means is that there's less oxygen and more carbon dioxide. So they're carrying oxygen-poor blood back to the heart. Okay. Now they are large, so they carry large quantities of blood, but there's not a lot of pressure. They're so far away from the heart that little to no pressure at all is present in the veins. So veins actually depend upon usually muscle contractions, your muscle movements, to help pump the blood back. Okay? So basically, the legs are actually a really good example of this, and this is why old people have blood problems whenever they're on a plane or something. They have to make sure they're up and moving around, because in your legs, imagine tubes going all the way down from your feet have to get all the way back up to the heart with the blood. So they have these valves in them. Every single time you move your muscles, the valves open, the muscles squeeze, and they push the blood back up towards the heart. When the muscle stops contracting, the valves close and blood falls back down. But it prevents it from going all the way back down. It stops at the valve. So every muscle movement that you're making is pushing the blood back up towards the heart. Again, this is also why we take our 4-minute stretch breaks in class. Not just so that you're having a good time, but also to make sure that you're getting the blood flowing, so that way you can learn at your peak. So arteries get smaller and turn into arterioles. Arterioles get smaller and turn into capillaries. Capillaries get larger and turn into venules, and then venules get larger and turn into veins. Okay, so that's the blood flow from arteries to capillaries to veins.